Dragon Ball Z Kai is a 2009 remastered version of Dragon Ball Z created by Akira Toriyama. I don't need to give you a plot synopsis of Dragon Ball Z. If you saw my review for the original Dragon Ball Z show, it is basically the same here. All the plot points, all the character moments. If you saw Dragon Ball Z, you saw Dragon Ball Z Kai, but much longer. Dragon Ball Z Kai was brought to life with the idea that this will be more closely in line with the manga that was created by Akira Toriyama, and so a lot of the filler from the original Z program was cut out, so stuff like Gohan's training or Piccolo and Goku going for a drive, all that stuff is cut out now, and we're given a lot more focus on the plot of Dragon Ball, and we are more in line with what the manga brought us. And that led to a much faster paced show here that, in my opinion, had now the opposite problem of the original Dragon Ball Z program. Whereas Dragon Ball Z, I felt like, was a bit too slow when you compare to the manga. We compare Dragon Ball Z Kai to the manga, it is more in line with the pace of the manga, but it just went way too fast. As I think my main issue with Dragon Ball Z Kai has to be the fact that they just redid a lot of the animation styles, just remastered a lot of the original shots, redubbed it, which in my opinion was a much better dubbing than the original program, and even like just doing it like a lot of cuts and stuff of things here and there. It led to a show that, in my opinion, just went on a bit too fast, and I think it just led to a lot of some of my personal favorite moments just feeling a little bit hollow, despite the original show admittedly going too slow at times. The times where the slow pace worked were some of my favorite moments in all of Dragon Ball. I mean, the ending of the Cell Saga and the defeat of Perfect Cell himself. I felt the slow pace of that whole sequence was perfect. In Dragon Ball Z Kai, that was way too rushed, and it just left me wishing that the show could have just slowed down and just take its time with some of these more important scenes, gave the shots a lot more time to breathe, because I felt like individual shots of the show here were just too quick. I loved lingering on a lot of these animation cells and just basking in the environment and the action. Yes, pace the action a lot faster. Cut out some unnecessary filler if you need to. I'm fine with all of that, but I feel like what Dragon Ball Z could have done was just redo a lot of the animation cells and just make a new version of Dragon Ball Z just with updated animation. Don't take the original cells and just redo them or just redraw them. Create new animation cells that just makes this show feel like its own identity, because sometimes it just feels like a show with an identity crisis. But it is definitely a show that has a lot more elements that are better than the original Dragon Ball Z. As I said before, the dubbing in the English dub and Japanese is a lot better here. I felt like both versions of the dub were really authentic to the manga and felt more in line with what Akira Toriyama wanted for these characters. And despite me going on about the animation and how it just felt redundant to just re-update the cells themselves, admittedly, it is a much better animated version than the original show. The animation is a lot better here, a lot more crisp, and it just had a lot more vibrancy to it. And all in all, presentation wise, it did look good, despite the redrawn cells being way too out there and just feeling out of place. Like, you could tell which cells were redone and which cells were just remastered, and it just made for a visual whiplash at times where it's not egregiously bad, but it is noticeable when you see it, and you can't unsee it in that regard. But as for the story itself, if this is your introduction to Dragon Ball, I still think you're gonna have a really fun time with it. It is my introduction to Dragon Ball, really. This is a show that got me into Dragon Ball in the first place. This is a show that I saw in Colombia that got me into Dragon Ball. So nostalgia wise, I owe a lot to Dragon Ball Z Kai. I just think that there are things here that felt like were redundant in rewatch, but all in all, I still have a lot of fun with Dragon Ball Z Kai. I still love the story of Dragon Ball Z, which is still intact here. And just that alone, I was able to have a fun time revisiting this show again. Just all in all, I just felt like critically wise, it could have been a lot better. And I feel like it just had a lot of the opposite effects than Dragon Ball Z, whereas that version is too slow compared to the manga, this is too fast compared to the manga. I feel like if Dragon Ball Z was given a proper remake where it takes its time with certain scenes and certain elements of the show and the manga, it could have been like a perfect amalgamation of having moments that take their time while having the action go at a brisk pace while cutting out a lot of filler. But even then, I felt like some filler in the original Dragon Ball Z actually helped amplify some story elements. So yeah, this Dragon Ball Z, the series, whichever version you watch, has its moments, has its flaws. Whether you're watching Dragon Ball Z Kai or the original anime, both versions have their ups and their downs. But at least we still have the manga, which is, in my opinion, the best way to experience Dragon Ball Z, with Akira Toriyama and his amazing art and dialogue, visual storytelling. I recommend the manga first before really jumping into Dragon Ball Z, the anime. But if I were to give Dragon Ball Z Kai a grade, it will be an A-. I just harped on a lot of my negatives here just because I want to be fair and not say, ooh, Dragon Ball Z Kai is better than this. No, Dragon Ball Z Kai has the opposite problems of Dragon Ball Z. But both versions stay true to the manga and felt like the characters are true to who they are. The action is still amazing. The music, counting the copyrighted music out of the equation, is still really fun to listen to. Still, the big moments hit really hard. The dialogue is creative, the action is creative, the humor is still really funny. All in all, it is still Dragon Ball Z. I just think I prefer the original anime just a tiny bit more due to the big moments being a lot more impactful there. But still, Dragon Ball Z Kai is a great introduction to the Dragon Ball series if you're a newcomer, and still a good continuation of the original Dragon Ball show. And in many ways, it is a much better prelude to what's going to come afterwards with Dragon Ball Super. It leans more into the Dragon Ball Super direction than the original Z. So again, both versions kind of botched the Buu saga. I felt like the Buu saga in both versions, or in all versions, even in the manga, was just really messy. I never really was a fan that much of the Buu stuff. But all in all, I still recommend Dragon Ball Z Kai. It's still really fun. I just think I prefer the original version just a tiny bit. But Z Kai is still a really great show in its own right, and still a mostly successful update. Those are my thoughts on Dragon Ball Z Kai. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments down below. Please like, subscribe, comment, and I will see you guys next time.